How did I escape my cycles of suffering? I have been trapped in many cycles of suffering throughout my life. That is one reason I am here now speaking about it and helping others escape theirs. I have been caught in many cycles of pain, physical pain, mental strife, cycles of thought that were seemingly endless, anxiety and depression, many long cycles, depression, severe depression, alcohol abuse, substance abuse, food abuse, many things, right? We've all been caught in some of these cycles. I was caught in almost all of these cycles at once, as many of us find ourselves, and I thought I would never be able to escape. Why was I going through this suffering? It is through suffering we grow closer to God. It is through suffering we gain wisdom, and it is through wisdom we gain the ability to help others with their suffering. Some have an issue with this. They say, well, if suffering brings us closer to God, then why should we take it away? Oh, well, is not everything God? God is the suffering, and He is those helping take away the suffering. God is everything. We can have everything all at once because the universe is infinite and everywhere, everything all at once, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. That is God. That is our cosmic beloved. So how did I escape my cycles of suffering? I found myself in these very prolonged cycles, decades-long cycles of suffering. Jobs. I was in a job cycle of suffering where I was trapped in these jobs that caused me much stress and anxiety. Many of us can relate to this. There's relationship cycles. There's the cycles of thought, which is a big one due to the aggravators. We have to remove the aggravators, right? So how did when I found myself up against the wall in these cycles, what finally led me out of them? How did I get out of these cycles of suffering, seemingly not going to end, to where I am now? And where am I now compared to then? Well, I reached a point where I said, I need to start meditating, the power of meditation, because my anxiety and my suffering was so bad, I didn't know what else to do. This is what led me down this path. I was caught in these prolonged, severe cycles of suffering, many of them. I didn't know, I wouldn't say it was a cycle of suffering. That's not what I called it back then. I was just, you're in it. You're in the chaos. Your mind's in chaos. That is one of the foundations of why we're in our cycles of suffering. Our minds are in chaos. We don't know how to facilitate a peaceful state. We don't know how to bring balance because that's not what we're shown. We're shown the opposite. We're shown chaos, fear, violence, anger, things like this. These are pumped into us. We are loaded with emotional traumas. So we have all these things. We have a toxic world, a toxic food program, of all these things weighing us down and adding to these cycles of suffering. And this is why we can see through entertainment, through phones, through all these ways, that it's a constant stimulation of chaos. It's a constant aggravation, the aggravators. From every direction, since the moment we're born, our minds begin to be aggravated. It is not peace, it is aggravation. And this is what brings us out of balance. This is what takes us away from a peaceful state, from the present moment, the divine, eternal present moment, which is everything. So I started meditating, caught in these deep cycles of suffering. What happened was, when I started meditating, it gradually started to balance my emotions and balance my whole being. And it balanced, it allowed me to gain higher perspectives. It calmed my mind. It calmed my mind enough where I could start to see outside of my limited view, right? Because when we are born into this world, we are trapped in a lower perspective. We are given a somebodyness. You are somebody. You think you know. We're going to tell you things, and these are things your ego will know, and you cannot not know. This keeps us at lower perspectives. So as I started to meditate, I started to loosen up my perspective. I started to see from a much wider view. I started to move inadvertently toward the center of the circle. Because when we're at the edge of the circle, we can't see anything else. We can only see what's right in front of us, the very edge of the circle. But when we do things like meditate, purification, and presence, this is the edge of the circle. We start to walk back toward the center of the circle. And remember, the ego cannot exist in the center of the circle. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide for the ego in the center of the circle because it can see all, right? Well, not the ego. We can see all. Where this is the highest perspective is the center of the circle. The ego can't attach to us. The ego can't attach to us, and we're not attached to anything else. So that's what happens when we keep raising our perspective and raising our consciousness, doing things like presence and purification. And once we do things like presence and meditation enough, that will lead us into things like purification. And when we start to put these things together, and we start to experience God's love in the divine present moment and all that is, these will lead us out of the cycles of suffering, no matter what they are. Because the reason we're in any sort of cycle of suffering is because we are out of balance. It's because we are aggravated. Our beings are aggravated due to the world we live in, trying to keep us specifically in a lower state to control us, to feed off of us. So if we want to break free from this suppression, if we want to evolve and stop being stuck, being attached, hanging out with our ego all the time, we have to step back. We have to step back to the center of the circle. This is how I escape my cycles of suffering. I went from a decade-long cycle of suffering in my jobs, working very stressful and not supportive type jobs, to breaking free from that through presence and purification. And now I'm a stay-at-home father. I get to hang out with my kids all day. I get to eat fruit all day. I share my experiences with my beautiful brothers and sisters all day. So this is what I went through, these intense cycles of suffering, many of them, and through meditation, presence, purification, devoting myself to God's love, it brought me where I am now. I'm more at peace. I'm working on always, no matter what I'm doing, facilitating a peaceful state. No matter what I'm doing, I'm working on facilitating a peaceful state and staying present as the main focus. This is how we not only escape our cycles of suffering, but this is how we propel ourselves into our highest version. This is how we become our highest self. If you want to become your highest self instantly, stay in the present moment and surrender. I am God's eternal love pouring forth. So if you find yourself caught in one of these cycles, take a step back. Start to put things down. The aggravators, we need to recognize and remove the aggravators. We can say, okay, if my goal is to not think, stop thinking and stay present, what can I safely say is making that harder for me to stay in a state of presence? Anything that stimulates the mind, any sort of entertainment, anything in the world almost, until we get to a point where we can stay present and just observe. If we're having trouble just observing, if you can't just observe a TV without it getting into you and aggravating your mind, which is probably difficult for most, then maybe we need to remove it. We need to remove all these excess stimulations. So this is briefly how I was in my cycles of suffering and how I removed myself through bringing about balance and facilitating a state of peace and purifying the body, because all of these things work together, right? All these things work together, dissolving the ego and standing at the center of the circle, removing all of our attachments, giving ourselves the highest perspective. This allows us to do the divine's work. We are God. We are the divine working through us when we stay in the eternal present moment of God's love. Namaste.